Welcome, one and all, throughout time and space, for this episode of Weebs on the Weekends, the podcast where we break down the anime news highlights of the week and give a retrospective look on an anime that premiered 10 years ago. Today's episode will cover the anime news for the second week of February 2022. We would also give our thoughts on whether to resurrect or rebury the 2011-2012 anime franchise Symphogear. My name is San Martinez. I'm a part-time weeb, full-time automail mechanic, and with me as always is my co-host Jay Johnson, part-time weeb, full-time English language sensei. Now, Jay, I know that a lot has happened this last week. We had the newest Pokemon game, Pokemon Legends Arceus dropped. We have the Lunar New Year coming up. The Winter Olympics started yesterday. We had Sony's acquisition of Bungie as a response to Microsoft's newest acquirement. But the one thing that happened this week that I sort of want to talk to you about really is the dropping or the releasing of the animated series Vox Machina on Amazon Prime. Have you heard of it?
Oh, wow. Oh, that caught me off by surprise. But yeah, I think we had a news story about this last year, but yeah, can you refresh my memory about what it is?
Yes. So essentially, Vox Machina is a animated rendition or retelling of a Critical Role streaming series, where Critical Role is essentially these different voice actors. They get together and agree to do a campaign in Dungeons and Dragons. And essentially, Vox Machina is just an animation of one of their exploits. Essentially, one of the group or the guild that this group Critical Role had campaigned as, which is known as Vox Machina. And the reason why the reason why I brought it up in our podcast regarding anime is because when you watch this, this has all of the anime vibes in regards to the art style, with the fluidity of the animation. And I would say that with some of the jokes, some of the jokes is very, very Western. But when you look at it, it has that anime feel. So if anything, it feels like the remastered or the rebooted Thundercats, as well as the Ultron series on Netflix. And the reason why I want to pick your brain, Jay, because I was just thinking about it. I was talking to some acquaintances regarding Vox Machina because they're basically just playing Dungeons and Dragons. And with you being in Mongolia and having the weebish, geeky people that you have in your class, I was interested in if there is a Western version of Dungeons and Dragons that they have over there in the West. I don't know, maybe something like Trials and Tigers or something along those lines.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, so my knowledge of Critical Role kind of just extends to Matt Mercer as the DM of the series because, man, does that guy just bleed charisma. And I've seen him talk a bunch of times about how to run campaigns and how the proper etiquettes and mannerisms that you should have as a entertaining DM. Even though I don't actually play Dungeons and Dragons at all or any interest to play it, I always like to hear Brandon Lee Mulligan is another DM that I follow up with like very intimately because they're very well spoken orators as well. But in Mongolia, we don't really have too much of a role playing game that would be akin to Dungeons and Dragons or even something like with the Cyberpunk series. Cyberpunk with Michael Pond Smith as like the original creator of that series. But there are like campaigns I know that are being run in Mongolia, and they do take a lot of inspiration from Mongolian history with Genghis Khan and the whole Mongolian Empire, and kind of work it into the background of certain campaigns and characters and lore building. So, like the Mongolian deathworm is kind of like the creature that bleeds over into other cultures. You see that in Dune a little bit with the sandworms on whatever planet that is, Araxis, I believe.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Arrakis, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, other than that, not too much of dedicated Mongolian games. A lot of Mongolian games are still traditional, I guess, in the terms of what people still play nowadays, since it's among nomadic cultures. It's a very strong connection to the past, nothing new in innovations, essentially, in how games are run. But yeah, there are enough like mythology and lore that can be adapted into modern games that I've seen enough people play in Mongolia to say, oh, this is the Mongolian version of Dungeons and Dragons, essentially.
Okay. No, like I said, it will be very interesting because I had spoken to a mutual acquaintance of ours like earlier in the week, and it's just very interesting how people would take references from different cultures, but I guess like sometimes it will be portrayed properly, other times not. And just talking about Dungeons and Dragons with my acquaintances, it just got me thinking because the Western cultures have a lot of different lores and different mythos, things like that, and it was just I just found it kind of interesting that there wasn't anything like as big or as well known like Dungeons and Dragons or World of Warcraft that everybody knows about and that everybody plays. And I feel as though like there should be something equivalent there too. But I think like as you said, maybe it's just like more locally, and just the people in the area or in the culture, throw in like you said, the death worm,
Right. Yeah.
things from their own history to sort of make the games more interesting for themselves.
Right,
But
because like even if
yeah.
you're playing like the class of a bard, you could incorporate Mongolian throat singing or Kazakh throat singing, or if you're a
Mhm,
cleric, you're actually a shaman. Because again, like a lot of Mongolian history is in this space
mhm.
of accepting all religions and cultures and all kinds of people together, and then that kind of can add into a very interesting world to layer on top of D&D's like framework essentially. So you can again
Oh,
adapt it in different
you
ways.
you just made me think about it, right? When you said that the bard, you can incorporate throat singing. I'm just thinking like I just have this image of this bard that has this black bolt like level of power in regards to sound, or like I'm trying to remember that kid's name in Jujutsu Kaisen that has that speaking curse where he has to be very specific about his words, otherwise people will be affected by it. And I would say like that would be just like a very interesting character to do and to play as. But other than that, like I said, Vox Machina was a I guess like I said, because of the anime esque influences, I would consider it an anime that I was watching recently. What about you? What animes have you been watching recently that you've been enjoying? Because I know we had talked a little bit about some of our anticipated anime as well in the past.
Yeah, it's weird when it comes to the winter anime season because you're always trying to even catch up from the previous years. Because again, seasonal anime is so brutal when it comes to watch schedule. So, of course, I've been keeping up with Attack on Titan on a weekly basis, and bruh, that is like some major emotional damage hitting all the anime watchers. And I've kind of remained on the side of non spoilers, but how well the series is written, like you can see something that will mean something in the end. It's like great foreshadowing, and you're like, oh, that just spoiled something, but I don't know how it was spoiled. So it's like very entertaining in that way. Catching up on Ranking of Kings, I dropped off Orient after episode 1 because it's just the bog standard shonen adventure story of two bros going on a adventure road trip to slay demons, and I was like, okay, I'm fine with that. Other than that, I'll talk a little bit about my dress up darling, which didn't even make my list, but just came out of nowhere to surprise me, and I've been deep inside that. I've actually reconnected with the realist hero tries to rebuild the kingdom, which I dropped like 2 seasons ago. But there was a development in the latest episode that was like, oh, I need to catch up and see why this happened. So it's always like surprising when you come across anime that you kind of dropped off before, but something happens that warrants you to revisit again. But other than that, it's been a really decent season with some returning favorites, some new things. The Rust Eater Bisco
Yeah,
is also
Subugly Bisco. Hmm.
is terribly enjoyable. And with episode 5,
Terribly. Why is
yeah.
it terribly enjoyable?
Did you see the kissing scene?
Oh yeah. I saw that scene. I saw the scene. That was, I think, episode 3 or 4, and it
Yeah, it
wasn't
was 4.
really considered kissing because, like, at the time, it was like, oh, he's going to do the Heimlich. It's like,
Mhm.
oh no, that's not the Heimlich.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's like terribly enjoyable because like you're like, oh my gosh, that was so cool, but I'm so grossed out at it as well. And it was teased in the PV in the trailer, but I was like,
Yeah.
how it came up, it was like just very shocking. So really good anime, catching up from last year as well as keeping up with this season's. But now I have to add Vox Machina to the list since you recommended that as well, which is surprising because it feels like it dropped very much like how Arcane dropped, kind of with no prompt and circumstance.
Oh yeah. Well, I would say it was weird because on Crunchyroll, that was where I saw some of the commercials for it. And previous guest Gerard, he had sent me some commercials for it as well before it came out. And it's funny that you mentioned Arcane because the way they release Vox Machina, it's very similar to Arcane, where when they do drop new episodes, it's three at a time. So right now there's 6 episodes available, and the next time that they are supposed to drop, I think it's either this week or next week. It's supposed to be 3 more episodes, and I think that's supposed to be the conclusion for this arc of Vox Machina that they're doing.
Oh, cool. Yeah, the Vox means voice machine. So I'm actually that's a very interesting title by itself because it basically inquire it makes you want to inquire about what the voice machine is. So I think based off the title by itself, I'm interested as well. But yeah, that's it. You want to move on to do some news now?
Yes, let's go on to some news. So, as I said, a little bit of craziness has been happening this week. I had mentioned a little bit about video games earlier, and we've had mentioned arcades in the past a little bit, and we can't, at least like the relationship with anime and with video games, they're very, very strong. And earlier this week, it was released that Sega's arcade in it's in Tokyo. I think it's yeah, in Tokyo, Genda. It will be sold, or it will be under new management. It turns out that in the fall of 2020, Sega had sold approximately 85% of the arcade already, and it seems like it's just now selling the rest of it to another establishment. And they will be removing the Sega name from the building, and it now will be called Gingo or Gigo, Gigo, which is a name that Sega had previously used at another arcade location, at its arcade location in Ikebukuro. And it's just very interesting because this arcade has a long history in the location in the location in Genda. It's been there for about 56 years. And I wanted to get your opinion on this, Jay, because you seem to be more versed in the arcade subculture. Uh, as I said earlier, with things with the entertainment industry known as video games moving and shifting around a lot. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Oh, sorry, my bad. Time
Yeah.
codes in the description below, and in the
Yes,
doobly
yes,
doo.
yes. Time codes. Oh
Yeah,
my
yeah,
goodness.
always in the
My
bottom.
bad.
Yeah, yeah. Like for our normal episodes, we just have these two sections, so news and then review. But yeah, off of what you just said, Sam, I'm very interested in the story because of it. Kind of is a indicator of something I don't think most people are really giving enough thought about. Is that what has what is really the future fallout of COVID and all the restrictions going on, and the arcade industry is probably one of those industries that is going to get killed off essentially if things continue the way that they are, especially in Japan, given that they are still having wildly diverse numbers and COVIDs with Omicron and maybe potential future variants, as well as shutting out foreigners. Their tourist industry has bombed. Their not import, but their acceptance of foreign exchange students as well have basically dropped to zero. A lot of students are on this waiting list for visas for 2023 and 2024 already. So that list has been piling up. And it seems that Sega has kind of taken this chance opportunity to say, oh, we're just going to wipe our hands clean of the arcade industry or arcade sector of their business, which they have been dominating in. So they're not getting out of the arcade business. They're still going to be making video games, from crane machines to online. I forgot what those specific names, gotcha machines are that you can do online from even across the world. You can get it sent to you, which is really cool. But yeah, it's actually Ginga Incorporated is where the subsidiary that's taking over all these arcades and getting their name from. So the locations that are going to be probably shut down first are the ones in Tokyo, which are Ikebukuro, Shinjuku, and Akihabara, and then probably spread out to the rest of Japan probably after this year. But it's not too much of a terrible news story here, but it is like one of those upsetting things that a conglomerate or this big, massive, historic game company is going to be dropping their name. But there's still going to be Sega games inside. It's just going to be under new branding, essentially.
So yeah, like I guess like they'll still be making money from the patrons, but they're not necessarily going to be owning the brick and mortar that the patrons will be going into. And segueing to my other bit of news, blending the world of anime and video games a little bit more, it was reported that the producer Yosuke Shiokawa has left Delightworks to form his own studio known as Fahrenheit 213, which and the reason why this is fairly big is because Delightworks is known for making or producing the anime as well as the video game series Fate Grand Order. And we don't really know too much of what Fahrenheit 213 will be making. They just mainly state that it's going to be working on the development of new intellectual property. But it's again, like it just seems like the terrain of video games is going to be changing, and it seems as though that it's going to be affecting anime as well, because again, this work has worked on Fate Grand Order. It's worked with Square Enix games such as Kingdom Hearts and Dissidia Final Fantasy. So it's again just very interesting seeing how people are moving from one thing to another. Do you think that we may be getting more franchises similar to the Fate Stay franchise, or do you think that they're going to be doing something completely different, Jay?
Mixed media has become a lot more frequent in the past decade, 5 years, but it's not surprising that this happened because the story is more of that there was an acquisition that broke up
Mm-hmm.
the company essentially. So when you mentioned that they're going to be working on new developments, that's kind of quote unquote meaning, oh, we fired everyone and it kind of just exists as a hollow shell of what it used to be, which is really
we
interesting.
kind of cleaned house.
Yeah, it's again like one of those things of probably again an effect of COVID and people wanting to do more telework and realizing that some job positions aren't really necessary anymore. So, like you said, everything about this does speak to like a more modern trend because we talked about Tact OP was a mixed media project to promote a mobile game. Same thing as with the company that you just mentioned, had did the Fate Stay Order and also all the smart games that came out, smartphone games that came out relative to it. So this is just a big move in that section because Cloverworks, again, is the anime portion of the partnership that you just mentioned. And they are basically a competitor with Ufotable because I actually didn't know until Gerard came on and talked about the whole Fate Stay series or the Fate series in total, about that the Fate Grand Order was not actually done by Ufotable, that it was done by Cloverworks, and Cloverworks has been like on the rise with a lot of their high profile anime
Hmm.
recently. So it's really interesting in that game developments from like Dragon Age, not Dragon Age, but Dragon Quest is kind of the proto example of a video game that became a manga, that became a video game. Same thing with like Dragon Ball. There was like multiple Dragon Ball games. But yeah, video games and anime are going to be linked. But how well they're going to be linked is probably be a lot more closer in the near future.
Onwards to the next bit of news I have. It's more along the anime and manga relationships. So we had gotten word that the anime series Mushoku Tensei had reached, oh yeah, has exceeded in selling, has exceeded in having 10 million copies in circulation. And it's not necessarily a sales statistic, but it's just showing, I guess, like, um, how many copies they have like out there, like available and being sold, things like that. But just showing just like how uh popular it has become. And also in this news article, it had mentioned that the second half of the season two has been delayed. It was originally supposed to come out in 2022, July of 2022. However, it has been pushed back to October due to quote unquote various circumstances. So just like I said, it's we've been talking about this franchise for a little bit. It's was high on our list, especially for the top 10 anime as well, and it's a monumental moment for this franchise, and I figured that it definitely needed to be shined upon for that. What do you have any thoughts on Mashoku Tensei receive or exceeding 10 million copies in circulation, Jay?
Just that 10 million copies is always that marker that publishers kind of set as the bar, because given that you get a anime adaptation, then you get the following wave of, oh my gosh, I did not know this thing existed, and then oh my gosh, there's actually source material following it. And like you said, it's not a sales statistic, it is just the demand that publishers don't want to ever reach a point saying that demand is overseeding supply. Essentially, we were counting on this, like with Jujutsu Kaisen, same thing with Tokyo Revengers when they hit their 10 million uh, circulation mark. That it always happens, and this is just a case of studio buying. Again, you talked a little bit about how it's going to be delayed in the future, and with season one ending with one of those nice cards of "Thank you for watching," and dude walking off into the sunset, it does feel like they don't actually know when the second season's going to occur, like for good reason. So it's very interesting that how much success is garnered that they ended the series that, or they ended the season one with that way. So hopefully, them reaching the $10 million threshold and probably going to push over into that with actual sales this year, it would warrant a rush or more budget for season two.
And I'm sorry, I misspoke. It was the second
Part of
core.
season one.
Yeah, the second part of season one that was pushed off. It was supposed to be in July 2021, but it got pushed off to October. And there's also a mention here about spin-off series
Roxy
known
gets
as
serious.
Bishoku. Yep, Roxy Gets Serious. So who knows? Depending on how uh, popular this gets, we may be able to see a animated version of Roxy and her own adventures, which would be very interesting. And
Yeah, because like it does feel
mhm,
like with the spin-off series, it does feel like something suited for an episode um, of season two, not to again, to divert attention away from the main series. Because again, they did a Roxy centric episode in the first season, so it feels like if they were going to do a spin-off, Studio Buying should stay focused on one property at a time and not dilute the market essentially with like multiple clones, like how they did with Sword Art Online. So hopefully they don't actually do that.
Yeah, or at least until Jobless in itself is finished, right? That way, like you said, there's only like one franchise out there in circulation at a time. Now, on to okay, that news has gotten away from me. That was by accident. So I'm going to have to sorry, had to cut the news a little short. So we'll go with this last bit of news that I have here. And apparently, the March issue of Shueisha's Coco Hana had revealed on January 28th that the mangaka Kozueko Morimoto will launch a new manga title known as Jano Me no Me in the magazine's April issues on February 28th. And the reason why this is brought up is because Morimoto's previous works, known as Gokusen and Kodoke no Hitobito, have are mangas of great acclaim where they have inspired live action television series and a live action film. Whereas essentially Gokusen is, from the synopsis, it seems very similar to the great teacher Onizuka, except where you follow a male teacher who was a delinquent in the past, having to deal with a delinquent class. In Gokusen, we are following a female math teacher who goes to an all boys high school and has to deal with the male delinquent class in her high school. And apparently, again, as I said, it's done well enough to where it garnered a live action television series as well as a movie. And this new franchise that the mangaka is making, again, Janome no Meme, is going to be focused on a female protagonist who has a special eyes that can help her exercise spirits. And Jay, I know this seems like it's a little bit of a random or out of pocket article, but I sort of wanted to get your opinion on that. Getting that we're getting another slice of life anime, but from at least from the PV, or like not necessarily the PV, but the promotional image, it seems like we're going to be focusing on an older uh, female protagonist. I guess like sort of wanted to get your opinion on that. That we're getting more slice of life stuff. Do you think that this will turn into an anime or become another live action franchise?
Yeah, this is something I'm very not out of pocket. That's yeah, that's like that's your word for it. I don't ever say out of pocket, but sorry, it was just weird thinking about Goku Sen, because like you were right on about paralleling it to the great teacher Onizuka, because the Goku Sen has always been this space of like the Genki story, but from a different perspective. A Genki meaning delinquent, but it's like how many sides of that can you tell? And it's always again revisiting a genre from a different perspective. Same thing with Tokyo Revengers. It's the Yankee story, but with time travel. Spoiler alerts. But and it's weird that she has the prestige of the Goku Sen, because the anime adaptation that came out in 2004, and it definitely feels like it's a 2004 anime, but it was done by Studio Madhouse. So she does have the claim of getting her published works into anime form by one of the greatest anime companies of all time. So
Hmm.
I'm very not surprised that she's coming out with another series kind of in the same vein of following the demographic of the older female, or the older female demographic, because of the Kokohana demographic is for women's, or Kokohana is a women's manga magazine. Same thing as with how
Okay.
Shonen Jump is a younger boys magazine. So, you know, it's operating in the same space that we're not familiar with, but it has the popularity that would carry it into the mainstream. It's just something that's not in our view. So, not surprised, and we'll probably follow this up because it does seem to be, at least if she follows the same example of slice of life and comedy and with a little touch of drama, then probably something that we have to check out a little bit later on.
Oh yeah, definitely. It would be a definite breath of fresh air. I mean, we do our best in order to expand our intake of anime, especially on this podcast. That was the purpose of it. But I know, like, it seems like to be a trend where it's like we either find animes that are like tragic or violent or hyper action to be very good. But it seems like we're starting to expand our horizons with the slice of life and the comedies that are done very, very well. So it'll be very interesting to see where this work goes. And I may look into Gokusen to see if her work is as good as everybody else says it is. But that's all that I have for the news today, Jay. We're ready to go on to the anime. I'm sorry, that was a question. I'm oh my goodness. That was a bit of a foible. So, essentially, we're time codes, description box. Now we're going to be going on to today's anime, which is known as Symphogear. And Jay, this is I've heard of Symphogear a little bit, but I'm not very familiar with it. This is my first time watching this work. Is this your first time watching it, or are have you seen this work before?
Yeah, this is again my pick, and again I've talked about how I didn't know we were just going to go with my pick, my pick, my pick, my pick for the last couple of 5 weeks, probably. But yeah, this is another series that I have no exposure to beforehand, and it's something that surprisingly operates in the same vein as High School DxD. Do you pronounce the X in
I
DxD? I
think
wonder.
you would do the same thing with Hunter x Hunter, where sometimes like you can say the D, or it could be like Hunter cross Hunter, so it might be D cross D or double D. I don't
Oh,
know.
double D. That makes more sense given how it's
I would say
obsessed with.
double D. I just
Yeah,
came
no.
up with that.
No, but it makes sense for how the show is kind of obsessed with breasts. But
Opie.
yeah. Yeah, so this is a series that is actually pretty confusing. So just to run a little bit of the backstory of Symphogear, because this is a 2012 sci-fi magical girl anime, which is done by Studio Satellite, which is part of our studio profile that we're doing for this year. So we're doing our voice actor profile as well as a couple of studio spotlights on studios and see what they actually released in 2012 and compare them to the works of each other as well inside the studio of themselves. So for Studio Satellite, we're doing Symphogear, AKB Infinite 48. Ooh, that's a mouthful. And Much Love Alternative. And that also has a second. I think Total Eclipse is like the full title.
Okay.
Yeah, Much
Oh
Love
wow,
Alternative, Total
that
Eclipse.
sounds like a strong light novel.
Yeah, exactly. So, Studio Satellite produced this, or they animated 12 episodes, 13 episodes in total, but
Mhm.
there are 5 total seasons, and this is why it gets a little confusing because the first season is called Symphogear, season 2 is called
Mhm.
Symphogear G, season 3 is called Symphogear GX, uh, then it followed up by AXZ, then XV.
They're
So
trying to
all the
use all the letters, man.
yeah, it's very odd because it's a original anime, which is such a weird naming system. So it does happen. So again, talking about the
Mhm.
comparison to High School Double D is because it's the same vein that has been kind of running in the background because
Mhm.
there's 5 seasons and I've never heard of this anime till today, and the last 5th season came out in 2019. So it's actually been running for almost 10 years.
One more thing about the studio before you go on, Jay. Just want to let the audience know, uh, at least like some of the other works that Satellite has done that may be a little bit more familiar. I had looked into it. Like they also did Fairy Tail, Log Horizon, Hellsing Ultimate, and even one of the newer animes, Sakugan, as well.
Yeah, so Satellite
Mm-hmm.
is more of a co-production company, so they
Mm-hmm.
actually only have a few original properties. So
Oh, okay.
Sakugan
So yeah.
is actually the one I wanted to talk to you about since you
Okay.
mentioned it last year as on your you were going to plan to watch it and then
Mm-hmm.
didn't bring it up for the honorable mentions or even in your top 10. Did you get to watch any of it last year?
I did, and it's it's a good romp. There are some things that I had issues with. I really like the dynamic of the father and daughter, but it's sort of everything else that they have going on. Uh, because essentially, they well, brief thing about the story, they find a gem that leads a map for them to go somewhere. Like they all live underground, and she being the little girl wants to go out and find the thing on the map, and the dad's like is reluctant to let her go, and so he goes with her, and it's pretty fun seeing them going on the adventure, but it's more or less the uh, creatures and their quote unquote powers or abilities that uh, that they run into. It sort of puts a bad taste in my mouth. I have to go back and continue watching it. As I said, it's a good fun romp, but it's not like it wasn't top tier to make the top 10 list. It's good for casual viewing, but unless you're a specific person, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it.
Gotcha. Okay, that's fair.
Mhm.
So yeah, so they are responsible for that solely, and then the other ones most recently that they're responsible or were responsible for was Somali and the Forest Spirit, as well as
Mhm.
Cannon Busters, which had
They did
mixed
Cannon
reception.
Buster?
Yeah.
No, they didn't.
Yes.
Okay.
So yeah,
Oh,
mixed reception on
yeah.
Cannon Busters, but of the other studio productions that they are responsible for are the ones that we're talking about for this year. So it's a very interesting case with Studio Satellite, which is why we're giving them a spotlight. So for this first season, had 13 episodes, all available on Crunchyroll as well as the other seasons, of course. But the story centers on where do we start with this? But let's go with the story centers on Hibiki, who is our main seat
Mhm.
or our main character, and the other wielders of Symphogear, which is basically armor powered by music, and their fight against the noise, an alien race set on destruction. Very simple, premise, but it can
Yeah.
blow out from there. And it's so similar to listeners back in 2000 or 2020, as well as Tact OP Destiny, which we talked about a little bit last year in 2021. But Sam, boy howdy, have I never been on board for an anime so hard after episode one. This
Really?
is an this is
Okay.
a series you cannot just read like the Wikipedia article for because I had no idea. One, it is graphic in the violence that just springs out of nowhere,
Mhm.
which basically explains the reason why Tact OP didn't work for me. Because, first of all, in the first episode of Symphogear, they give you characters to really feel attached to because Hibiki gets a hole blown out through her chest, essentially,
Yeah.
in a random attack by these noise. Again, the same thing. What were the creatures called in Tact OP?
Oh my goodness. It was something similar.
Yeah. D2, I think.
Yeah.
D2s.
The D2, the D2s,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. But yeah, so these nameless or faceless, mindless swarms of creatures, alien creatures, we don't know where they're coming from. Basically, for the first episode and why I was so enamored by it is because you kind of think it might be an idle story, but it begins with a flashback where like the Japan has been destroyed. A girl's
Mhm.
visiting a grave site, and you see that Hibiki has died,
Yeah.
essentially. And then it flashes back to basically Hibiki getting her powers, where at a concert, the noise, these creatures attack, people are just obliterated. And it's like, I was watching an idol show, and now my loved ones are disintegrating next to me, turning black and getting eaten by oddly adorable creatures, like worm
Oh
creatures and like
yeah,
teddy
that's right.
bears.
They do look very chibi
Yeah,
and
very chibi.
plushy.
Yeah, and then you get to a point where there's some kind of armor that they're trying to like research, and like there's some kind of connection with these creatures as well with the music that these idols are
Hmm.
singing. I'm going to be rambling because I'm just so terribly impressed with these first 3 episodes. And again, first 3 episode test for any anime is spoiler free, that we say we give spoilers for because that's setting up the story. But with this first episode, again, I feel so strongly connected to it because every moment, every beat of the first episode to the very end, when there's like this Akira montage of Hibiki activating her powers for the first time and all these mechanical parts extend out of her and she's screaming out in pain and her body gets cladded in armor, but then her eyes are glowing red like she's going to be the villain of the series. And it's just like so back to back jarring because the hero that saved Hibiki and gave her transferred her powers to her just evaporates when you see basically her partner like hugging her and she just turns
Yeah.
into ash. It's like
Hmm.
graphical violence with teen pop music and moe girls with their character design running for their lives and cute panda dolls chasing after and dissolving people. Like just everything pops off in the first episode and let me stop rambling. But how did you feel for these first 3 episodes, Sam?
I'm glad that you said your piece because we have different opinions. I do see this as the progenitor for Tact OP and even Vivi Fluorite's song because we're essentially seeing music being used in combat, and it's just the concept of it is very interesting, and I liked how this is essentially a shonen but for girls, and in a sense that you still have the high pace action of shonen but you're focusing on girls, and they don't necessarily downplay the role of men, but like when you do have a male character that's there, they're not creepy or very perverse or anything else like that. They're actual human people, and they're few and far between because you're focusing on a story about girls, but I do appreciate that. And I would say that I disagree with you a little bit in how the noise was introduced. At least in Tact OP, we are given an explanation that the D2, when they do come or they do garner whenever the people play music, very much akin to A Quiet Place. Sound draws them in, right? At least like sounds of a certain frequency. Whereas in this franchise, noise it's not really explained when they show up. It's simply, it seems like they're just thrown there just to show up. And I do like the character Genjuro, which is essentially the guy who is Nick Fury if Nick Fury was a buff fire gym leader. He's basically like the leader of the Symphogear, but I feel like the attack in the first episode is their own problem because they have an artifact and they explain how these girls are able to use these simple gears, which are based off of artifacts, whereas essentially the artifacts resonate with a person when they activate it by singing a certain song so that they can imbue themselves with armor, things of that nature. And they were doing research on this artifact in the concert, and like we see them like doing sciencey stuff. We don't necessarily know what it is, but we see them doing sciencey stuff, and they essentially put all these people at risk at the concert. Like I'm assuming that that artifact was what had brought in the noise. They don't really know, but I mean, you can't rule that out. And it's just like, okay, you're supposed to be helping these people, and like you're making it seem as though you didn't really have a part in that massacre that had happened, right? And I, I guess like in terms of like how they explain things, because there are times when the girls would sing a song to activate the armor, and they would keep singing as they fought, and it was just very odd that they would keep singing. And at times like it would make me disjointed, because like as they were singing it didn't match the pace of the fight. But thinking back on it, because as you said before, the armor is activated by singing, and it is powered by singing. So it sort of makes sense in a fight, because in a fight you're essentially trying to gain control of the tempo of the fight, how everything moves. So it sort of makes sense that like at first you would like in this sort of thing, like you would try to essentially have your song win out at the end. You would try to make them get on your beat. So I sort of like understood that. But again, like there were some things that they could have done to smooth things over a little bit. Like for instance, Hibiki, when she activated her armor, she just started singing for no reason. I mean, she's in chorus, but like she just knew that she needed to sing. I guess kind of because her artifact is like the shrapnel in her, like Tony Stark. So I guess like she has some sort of unseen connection that we don't know. As I said, like it's a definitely interesting progenitor, and I'll get off my soapbox. I'm sorry, I took up a lot of time, but I guess like what are your thoughts on my observations? Do you agree? Do you disagree?
Uh, to mention the music, because I think that's not a selling point too much, but I think it is an interesting component to it. Again, something that I think does speak to why Vivi works, and like something like this series doesn't, is because there's no really strong composition to how the music is going to fit into the fight scenes, like you said. So like the Kanade is the person that dies in the first episode that gives Hibiki her powers. She's singing an aria, and that is done by. Oh, I wanted to give credit to the composition of the soundtrack, because it's done by Elements Garden, which is a Japanese um, pro wow, why can I not say this word? Producer group, yeah. So it's like a super group of producers, and they're responsible for the soundtrack or the music in The Time I Was Resurrected as a Slime, as well
Oh,
as
okay.
Bodacious, this is funny, Bodacious Space Pirates, which is a 2012 anime that we wanted to talk about, but, well, I wanted to talk about because it's such a weird title, but can't really find it anywhere on legal streaming, and as well as 14 other animes that they're responsible for. But I
Mm,
definitely vibe with the negative that the music isn't as incorporated that it could be, because there seems to be, at least projecting that there's going to be 5 or 4 other seasons, that there's going to be different musicality to different people's armors and how they relate. But again, if it's going to be incorporated into fight scenes, then you think it should match. But
yeah.
all the other points I think you brought up do align with like other series that it can be pulled from, or you can identify that it has been done over here and why it works here as well. Because the organization, like you said, they're researching artifacts, but it's kind of in the same vein as Secret Seven that we talked about not a couple episodes ago, but wow, a while ago.
Last season.
Yeah, last season, right? Yeah, Secret Seven, as well as even Nerve in the Evangelion world, we don't actually know if the people we're looking at are the good guys. And again, if you're
Yeah.
waging war against a unknown enemy or alien invading force, where do you draw the line to experimentation with weapons to defeat them? And I kind of just wrote it off for that justification. It's like if they need people cheering, or they need this kind of group effect of enjoying music for these artifacts to work or to be equipped to certain wielders, because the armor that is in episode 1 goes missing, and then it reappears in episode 3 as basically the,
Yeah.
quote unquote antagonist or potential antagonist to end the 3 episode review. Same thing as with uh, the detriment I think that the D2s in Tech OP present is because if music attracts them, don't play music. It's like, yeah. And even though that sucks as, humans and we know we have a connection to music, and it's like, well, if there's no music in the world's not worth living in kind of thing. But that's such a dumb kind of sentimentality where in this, they are just random natural forces in the world that will just eat people and appear out of no reason. So it's kind of like that. It's these pilots going against these unknowable, unpredictable forces. So, at least in these
Mhm.
first 3 episodes, that's kind of why I got attached to it. But other than that, oh man, okay, I could not gossip, but I could rant a little bit more about why I like it. But yeah, I think what you brought up about
No, no, no. I was going to say, give us some more good points, but wanted you to finish your thought before you did that.
Oh yeah, so I want to go back to what you said about Vivi, is about how it incorporates music. So I really chose this because of the idea about how music has been being used in like more modern anime. You brought up Vivi, which as a perfect example is that she's a singer, and that core of her character development or arc is tied into the music. Same thing as with Great Pretender using the Freddie Mercury music and music from Queen. Same thing with Carol and
Hmm.
Tuesday, given those sweet white tones, those snow white tones that came out last year as well. So like the music genre is getting like a lot more attention, and we talked about it a little bit before about how these niche genres are getting like more attention because people like us have been raised in anime and we know what our side hobbies or side interests can be incorporated or animated in a certain way that is entertaining. So I think all that adds into why Symphogear works is that if the foreseeable future for these following seasons are going to work, then they need to incorporate that a little bit more heavily. So again, that's something I can say like maybe the 3 episodes don't work for, you know, everybody, but it is like
Hmm.
a projected investment that as the series goes, especially since it ended in 2019, that they get a better control of musicality in it, especially if they have a group of producers behind it.
Almost definitely. I think I feel like though, because as long running as it is, it's going to have a similar issue that Dragon Ball or Naruto had, where essentially the story runs away from them because, as we know, there's 6 seasons, but the beginning of the first episode, there was that scene at Hibiki's quote unquote funeral gravesite. So and Hibiki is obviously in the subsequent series, so I'm thinking that they're probably going to retcon it or pull an Araki from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure and completely forget that they even wrote that in. I want them to also be a little bit more solid because, at least like in the writing, or I guess like wait to see like how they explain some things because like they didn't explain some things when I wanted them to. It was like always after the fact. It's like I will watch one episode, I would be mad that they didn't explain something, and then the next episode they kind of do. It was like, okay, you tried. And like for instance, Genjuro, the boss of gym leader, right? We see him do an enormous physical feat, and I'm just thinking to myself, okay, this guy is badass. Why doesn't he have a Sympho gear? And they don't touch it at all. So maybe later on they'll explain why only I forgot what their names were. Blue haired girl, why Subasa and Kanade were chosen to use the artifacts. If there's something, I mean, they said earlier that you can only have like they have to seeing a certain frequency in order to resonate with the artifacts. So I guess like what the vetting process is for that. Maybe Genjiro is just a horrible singer as even in the shower. So but maybe is just like a beast of a physical human specimen. And it's I guess it would just it's just that like that feat is too much of an impact to be simply written off as a quirk, and I wanted answers and I didn't get them, so I'm a little butthurt about that.
Got you. Yeah, so see, it's funny because we're on like totally opposite scales because now I want to push up
Yeah.
my glasses and say, actually, Sam, but it
Oh,
is interesting.
go ahead, correct me.
Oh, well, it's not correcting. It's just like one of those
Yeah,
things that like I was so tuned into it because usually when we watch episodes or when I do the 3 episode
yeah.
test, my mind is kind of distracted. It's, again, we're only weebs on the weekends again, haha. But in the second episode, it explains why the school is going to be like again why the whole slice of life and school life is part of the tag is because the school is actually a testing site as well to gauge
Oh,
potential future wielders of the Symphogear. And
but it's
again,
an all-girls school.
that's really messed up. Is that this organization is basically
Yeah.
using kids as test subjects? Again, there is a lot of parallel, I think, to this with Gundam Age, which we talked about in the previous episode. Is that it has like the colorful designs of hair and like very eccentric scientists and like the whole idea of throwing kids into the front lines of a battle because uh, the other girl that survives or is basically the co-star to Hibiki is Subasa, and her Symphogear is like she does like breakdancing in like a couple of scenes, but like they do have like different attributes and fighting styles to their gears based on their music or their musicality. So same thing as with why the school is being used, and it's explained in the second episode is that yeah, we are doing all this testing because there's people practicing music above us, and we can gauge who's going to be like a chosen one essentially, and then sacrifice them to the god of war and whatnot. And then Subasa, again, the co-star, is like, oh well, the person I looked up most to like sacrifice their life for you, and you're using their ability essentially. So of course I'm not going to like you. So there's that rivalry set up at the very start with a tsundere character kind of type.
Oh yeah, like that the character with the character interactions with Tsubasa and Hibiki, it's done very very well because in the beginning of the show we see Tsubasa as the timid one and Kanade was the one that was pushing her, right? And without that pushing force, Tsubasa feels guilty for not being able to support Kanade how she wants to. So we see her throw herself into training, you know, numbers in terms of killing these noise as much as she can, as efficiently as she can. Like she prides herself on that, and then to see somebody like Hibiki, a greenhorn person, basically don on the same uh, armor, is essentially a slap to Kanade's memory in Subasa's perspective. So the resentment and the pushback that she gives her, it's very much ado and or at least very understandable. So I really do appreciate how they do that. I guess like one thing I do question though is like why they mainly just focused on women and they didn't really explain why that. I guess they don't necessarily have to, but it I don't know. It just for me it seems as though like if they wanted to like you said try to find new test subjects like they would go to again they would have a school that's focused for singing, but you would try to widen the amount of candidates that you can get. You would try to get like both men and women, but they didn't really explain like why we haven't seen any male candidates. But I guess because it's a female centric show, they don't really have to. But it's just like one of those questions that I have. that I'm probably never going to get an answer to.
Yeah, we did cover which anime did we? Now you see, I'm blanking because I'm an old man, but there was another mecha anime that we covered
Oh,
something
that
sim.
was that was Infinite Stratos, where
Oh,
it
Infinite
was,
Stratos, yes.
yeah.
So yeah, again, talking about whenever they go into mech centric stories or sci-fi stories,
Mhm.
that it's always a hard lean between how sci-fi do we make this when it's not enjoyable when it gets into the techno babble kind of
Mhm.
prospect. And we had a previous guest, Raza, who was more of a music expert that could probably talk about the different singing styles of male singer versus female singer. So they're probably shying away from that and kind of just laying over the blanket of, oh, this is a demographic for a certain reader group. Or again, like it
Well, I mean,
feels very much in the vein of like it shouldn't be
mhm.
an original series. This feels like this should be a light novel series that people have
Yes.
enjoyed for years. But I think along the lines of why I would say if we're giving it a verdict of resurrect or rebury, I'm firmly in the resurrect category because I'm definitely going to watch the rest of the episodes and the seasons after this because I'm kind of in deep with what it's presented so far in these 3 episodes. But uh, I think the main point I would recommend that this is resurrected is because you, this is part of the magical girl genre that has been out of date for so long. And given
Mhm.
that it ended in 2019, it probably did enough to change or to modernize itself to say that
Yeah.
maybe the first 3 episodes isn't actually good. And I've said this a little bit before, but I'm projecting that it's going to get better because it lasted so long with the original concept idea. So I'm going to say resurrect, but are you definitely on the reburied side, Sam?
No, I'm on the resurrect because there is a need for work like this. I did recognize that. As I said before, it's a female centric show, and you do have male characters that are written competently, or at least like they're human, and they're not skeevy scumbags. I definitely, I mean, there is a need for space for a female action show, and this definitely uh you know does its job well enough to do that. As I said before, I think, like, if it wasn't for Simple Gear, we wouldn't have animes like Tact Op Destiny or Vivi Fluorite Song. So this is very much needed. There are just some things that I am probably like, again, like, my gripes, they could probably come off as nitpicky, like I said, with the n- lack of explanation for not using men. I mean, as you said earlier, like, they could have explained it saying, girls at this age seem to hit this frequency better. We don't know why. Could be developmental stuff like that. Like, a simple line like that could have been fine, but they didn't. Again, that's just being nitpicky. But what they do for the characters, like with Tsubasa and Hibiki, that's very well. I was a little uncomfortable what they were doing with Hibiki and her best friend, because it was like a pseudo lover friendship type thing. But aside from that, the story was done well enough to where you can have a good action adventure show that a young female audience can enjoy without having to feel some sort of way about it. Like, they'll have a show for themselves, and as I said, that's definitely needed. So, as you said, with as long running as it's been, I'm sure they probably had fixed a lot of their issues. I just hope that, uh, again, they don't have the plot issues that Dragon Ball or Naruto ran into. But it's popular for a reason, and as I said, it fills the need. Fills a need, definitely.
All right, very surprising that we got 2 resurrects on this because this is a 10-year review on Symphogear. And again, just to mention that all 13 episodes, as well as the other 4 seasons, are available on Crunchyroll. And that was my pick, Sam. So I think for next episode, we're going to be talking about the winners of the Crunchyroll Awards. Again, they are happening on the 9th of February. So we'll be talking next episode about the winners and see if our predictions came true. We probably need a reward and punishment for the person that scored the lowest or didn't get it. So we'll think about that. But also, I think next week is finally your pick, Sam, right?
No, maybe. I don't remember. All I know is that will be rediscovering adolescence and the world of fishing with the anime series known as Suritama.
Oh, yeah, that does sound like me. So, Suritama. So, yeah, again, I don't mean to pick all of mine, but
It's
again,
Jay's season. It's okay.
yeah,
It's okay.
yeah, but we'll be coming back to Studio Satellite. I don't know if this is a Studio Satellite or not a studio profile, but or a UG voice actor profile. But so we'll see. We'll see it next week whenever we talk about it. But yeah, we'll come back to Studio Satellite probably in the near future as well.
And that's all that we have for you today, good listeners. Jay, what do you have to say?
Yeah, so I've been skipping out on my duties as a teacher, so I have some vocabulary for you today. So the word today is symphony. Symphony comes from the Greek roots that literally mean sounding together, harmony of sound. It was borrowed into English as early as the 1200s. In classical music, a symphony is a type of elaborate, multi-purposed composition in classical music.